basically, we all have things that we regret in our lives, things that randomly pop up in our heads, especially as we're trying to go to sleep. And some things may be funny, like that video that we just watched, but other things can be a lot more painful. So the Cambridge Dictionary explains that regret is a feeling of sadness about something sad or wrong, or about a mistake that you've made and a wish that it could be different and better. So in other words, how I would boil this down is that generally there's kind of two types of regrets. So one is regretting something that you did, and the other is regretting something that happened outside of your control. And for both, we can either suppress it, wallow in it, or learn from it. So if we first take a look at the kind of regret over something we did, and then let's look at what suppressing that looks like. So suppressing regret could be pretending that it never happened, right? You distract yourself with other things, or you never admit that you did something wrong or apologize. Everything else is the problem. How could you be the problem, kind of thing? And so I have a question for you guys. If someone suppresses regret in this way, what do you think their future would look like? They just pretend it never happened. They never did anything wrong. Yeah. So yeah, like a trail of broken relationships, right? They just constantly do it again and again because suppressing regret, they can't deal with the fact that they did something wrong. What is interesting about that as well, because of the trail of broken relationships, they'll end up alone and feeling more regret.
True.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which they'll end up with what they were trying to avoid in the first place, right? But suppressing regret could also be vowing to never make the same mistake again. So, you avoid doing anything that has a possibility where you might make that same mistake. Say you failed a test, and because you don't want to deal with that feeling and you suppress the fact that you failed, and you're like, I never want to feel this feeling again, you work yourself to the bone in order to never fail again. So what do you guys think the future of this kind of person would look like if that is their life mindset?
Fearful.
Yeah. Scared to ever do anything, hey? Yeah. Most likely burnt out as well because they're striving so much to be perfect. You can see with suppressing your regret over something you did, there are some serious consequences. David Riddell, he says that he asks, are your regrets locked in a cold, dark room within your soul? Because that's only an illusion that you can keep that door shut forever. One day it will be torn violently open. What about wallowing over something we did wrong? So actually, an example of wallowing, I believe, is Judas, who we've actually been reading about in Matthew. And we read about what happened to him just now, right? So he agreed to help the Pharisees in exchange for 30 pieces of silver. So he gave up Jesus to them. And we've read about his regret and remorse. So Judas actually tried to return the money that he took from the Pharisees, and they told him, you made your choice, you're responsible. And then Judas threw the money into the temple, left, and then went away and hung himself. The Bible doesn't tell us exactly what went through Judas's mind during this time. But here's what I do know. Condemnation always leads to guilt. Condemnation doesn't offer a path back to reconciliation. Judas tried to make up for what he did by handing the money back to the Pharisees, right? And saying that he'd sinned. But the Pharisees don't offer him any comfort. They say, what is that to us? That's your responsibility. Basically, they tell him, we don't care. And then I think it is at this point that Judas becomes overwhelmed with regret, though he's wallowing in his regret and he doesn't see a way forward. And see, wallowing in regret is like constantly beating up yourself and condemning yourself, saying stuff like, how could you be so stupid? Why would you do that? You've messed up so bad, there's no going back. No one will ever accept you. You might as well give up now. And that's what Judas did, right? And when we wallow in our regret, there is a natural path, I believe, into depression and self-harm. But there is a third option, which leads to life. Let's take a look at Peter. Because in many ways, he and Judas actually shared a similar trajectory in the beginning. They both betrayed Jesus, and are forced to deal with their decision and their regret. You know, Peter makes a bold claim to Jesus that even if he dies, even if everyone else falls away, he would never betray Jesus. And then Jesus tells him, you will not only deny me, but do it 3 times before the rooster crows. And we've read what happened. 3 times Peter is asked, and not even by an official or a judge, it's just by some servant girl, whether he knows Jesus, and Peter denies Jesus 3 times. And he even curses the 3rd time. When Peter realizes what he's done, the Bible says that he goes away and weeps bitterly because he too is full of regret. A couple of days later, he ends up going to fish and the other disciples join him. This is in John's Gospel, so we haven't read that yet. All night they're out there and they don't catch anything. But then early in the morning, a man appears on the shore and tells them to throw their net on the right side of the boat. And lo and behold, they're not able to bring the net in because there's so much fish. And then they realize that that man is Jesus. And then what did Peter do? He jumped into the water and swam ashore. He went to Jesus immediately. So I believe the difference between Judas and Peter is that Judas tried to make up for his mistakes by himself, whereas Peter went to God. And what was Jesus' response? You know, once they got to the shore, they all had the meal together and had the fish. And then Jesus pulls Peter aside and speaks to him privately. Now, Jesus could have told Peter, you're disqualified from being my disciple. You talked a big game and said you would never, betray me. You denied me 3 times. You're not worthy of me. Jesus doesn't do any of these things. He just asks Peter, do you love me? And he doesn't do it once, he does it 3 times. And I believe that's important because Peter denied Jesus 3 times. So I believe Jesus was giving Peter the chance to express his love for Jesus and redefine his mistake and regret. As importantly, each time Peter tells Jesus that, yes, I do love you, Jesus says stuff like, feed my lambs, take care of my sheep. And so I believe Jesus was reminding Peter that God was still going to use him. He was still a disciple. He was not disqualified. He was telling Peter that despite his denial, his place in the kingdom didn't change, and that Jesus' plan and purpose for Peter remained the same. And that is the heart of God, right? He does not condemn, he convicts. Condemnation leads to despair, but conviction leads to repentance and restoration. And the heart of God is always for us to be reconciled to him. Psalm 51, verses 16 to 17 says that you do not delight in sacrifice, you as in God, or I would bring it. You do not take pleasure in burnt offerings. My sacrifice, O God, is a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart. You, God, will not despise. See, God doesn't need us to work to make up for our mistakes. We just need to go to him openly and honestly, accept responsibility for what we did, and then accept the grace that he offers. And just as we need this for salvation, so we need this for our regrets. The global church doesn't remember Peter for how he denied Jesus, right? But for being one of the 12 apostles, an early church leader, and actually bridging that gap between Gentile and Jewish Christians. And he's not the only one in the Bible where God redeems that person's regrets. We can take Naomi with her family. They left Israel, like God's inheritance for them. And when they went to a foreign land, at the foreign land, her husband and sons died. Yet when she decided to go back to Israel, her son's widow Ruth came with her. And then through Ruth and Boaz's son, their family line is redeemed. And not only redeemed, but part of the line of Jesus. We'll take King David. So full of promise, right? God had given him everything. Then he sleeps with Bathsheba, another man's wife, and has the man murdered. How do you come back from that? Yet because David went to God, confessed his sin, and truly repented, King David, he's known in the Bible as a man after God's own heart. And Jesus comes from the line of King David and Bathsheba. All these people still had to face consequences for their actions. Naomi still lost her husband and sons. The son King David had with Bathsheba died, and he faced a rebellion from another son, right? His son Absalom. Yet God did not let that define their legacy. He redefined and redeemed both their stories, and God can do the same for us. I think here are I thought about some practical steps for working through our regret in terms of things that we've done wrong. And the first step, I think, is to just accept what we did. And we just allow ourselves to feel the emotions that come along with it. It's uncomfortable. I don't think anyone finds sitting with what they did wrong fun. But it's not fatal, right? And actually, when we do stuff wrong, there's always beliefs behind it that we've believed that's why we did it wrong. Apart from I don't know. A car accident might not be you. I think we're able to differentiate what situations are situations where maybe you have a misbelief and so you acted out in a way that you did something wrong. So in that situation, it's identifying those misbeliefs and rejecting them, renouncing them, and then finding the truth. The second step is to accept God's forgiveness and grace, because you've failed, but that doesn't make you a failure. And we're defined by God, not by our mistakes. The third step is to forgive yourself. Often this is kind of the hardest step, because I think for a lot of people we're each our own harshest critic. But if even God does not condemn you, why do you keep condemning yourself? Number 4, make amends when necessary. So this is part of taking responsibility for what you did and part of repentance, right? So if someone has been wronged by our mistake, we need to apologize and ask for forgiveness. If the other person chooses not to forgive us, then that's their issue that they have to work through. If we have genuinely reached out and they don't want to talk to us and we've done all that we can do, that's all that we can do. And we don't have to continue carrying that guilt. The ball is in their court. And then number 5, I would ask God for a redefining moment, just like Jesus did with Peter. Yeah, so they were in like a fishing boat on the water, and then Jesus appeared on the shore. And then Peter was the only one who, in the Bible it says anyway, he took off his cloak, wrapped it around, and then jumped into the water and swam to shore. Yeah, he went after Jesus. Yeah.
I guess those details
Yeah.
really help.
Yeah.
Like this.
But it's in John chapter 21 verses 15 to 25 if you want to read about it. Okay, so the next part is looking at regret over something that happened outside of our control. So when we're looking at this kind of stuff, I'm talking about potentially things that maybe happened in your childhood. Maybe your parents weren't or aren't emotionally mature and it's left you with some deep scars. Maybe you grew up really impoverished and you didn't get the same opportunities as others. Or maybe you had a really bad accident and it's completely changed your life as a result. So again, there are those 3 general responses. So suppressing, wallowing, and learning. So suppressing your regret in the scenario could look like downplaying what actually happened to you. So you just lie to yourself and say, oh, it wasn't that bad. I'm sure other people have it worse. I just have to be positive. But what is the cost of doing so? So you gaslight yourself and you deny justice and healing for yourself. Imagine if your entire house was stolen. Would you say to yourself, oh, never mind, it's not that bad. I can just sleep on the street. I hope not, guys. We need to acknowledge what happens in our lives. So, well, say you acknowledge it, but then you start wallowing in it. So let me give you an example of what that looks like. If you say to yourself, oh, if only my parents were actually better parents, I wouldn't have so many issues now. It's all their fault that my life turned out like this. God must not care about me to let me have such crappy parents. So with wallowing, we definitely acknowledge the regret. The problem is that it doesn't give you a way out, right? You end up falling into despair and believing that God is unjust or unloving. You get angry and bitter at the injustices towards you, and it starts to eat you from the inside out. You'd start becoming cynical towards other people and their achievements and think, oh, well, it's only because they didn't have the issues that I had to deal with that they're doing so well. And sooner or later, you start to view the world like it hates you and everyone is out to get you. So then what does learning from this regret look like? Well, you definitely acknowledge it, but crucially, you don't stay there. So I wanted to take a look at Joseph's life in the Bible. You can find his story in Genesis. So many things happened to him that were outside of his control, right? That he in no way deserved. His father Jacob favored him and was expressive about it, so his brothers got jealous. Not Joseph's fault. Because they were jealous, the brothers sold him as a slave and then pretended he was dead. Not Joseph's fault. Whereas he was sold as a slave to his new owner Potiphar, Potiphar's wife wanted to sleep with him, and he turned her down because he had integrity. But then she accused him of trying to rape her, and he got thrown into prison. Again, not Joseph's fault. And he spends years there, and when he helps someone get out of prison, he asks them to remember him. They don't remember him. Also not his fault. Joseph could have easily got bitter and turned his back on God. Right? He could have started wallowing in his regret. If only my dad didn't have so many other kids. If only my owner's wife didn't want to sleep with me. If only. He could have decided, that's it. From now on, I'm just going to look out for myself and my own interests. Who cares about integrity? I've been so wrongly treated. Like, what good is it to follow God? But he didn't. And again, the Bible doesn't give us a clear glimpse into what Joseph was thinking at this time. But it does tell us that God was with Joseph and gave him success in everything that he did. Whether that was in his new owner's house, whether that was when he was in prison, or when he eventually became second in charge of all of Egypt. And I believe that Joseph held on to the promise that God made him right at the beginning, that one day all of his brothers and his parents would bow down to him. What can we take away from Joseph's life, and how do we apply it in our own? I would say in many ways the practical steps for dealing with regret for something outside of our control is similar to dealing with regret over something that we did. But there are a few differences, and I would say the first one is we need to acknowledge what happened and grieve, right? Because this is something that has happened to you outside of your control. We have to grieve what we lost because, yes, a lot of the times we have lost something. It's not right that, a kid is emotionally neglected as a child. And it's not right that someone is racially discriminated against, or that your teacher humiliated you in front of class. And I think, Helen, you have a talk on grieving and how to do it. So that's a different topic, but you can check Helen's talk out. And then number 2, I'd say it's to remind ourselves of the truth and God's promises. And there are so many promises in the Bible. Romans chapter 8 verse 28, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Isaiah 49:15, can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she was born? Though she may forget, I will not forget you. Number 3 is to forgive whoever has hurt you or whatever happened. Because true forgiveness is not letting someone off the hook or just blindly trusting them again. True forgiveness is actually for ourselves, for us to be able to move on. And then number 4, again, I would ask God for a redefining moment. Joseph, he went through all of that crap, but then God made him second in charge of all of Egypt. And it was like, that was his redefining moment. Hey, all of this stuff that you had to go through, all these years of misunderstanding, of pain, of being betrayed, has all led up to this moment. There's a purpose behind what you went through. Remember, there is no story so broken that God cannot turn into something beautiful. The past can't change, but our future can. And it's up to us whether we want our future to be more of the past or something different. So my question to you is this: do you want to live in regret or freedom? Yeah. Any questions?
Can you mind saying what's the definition of regret again, Jessie?
Oh, yeah, sure. So the Cambridge Dictionary explains that regret is a feeling of sadness about something sad or wrong, or a mistake that you have made and a wish that it could have been different and better.
Three things you can do with regret: suppressing it, wallowing in it, or learn from it.
Yeah.
So in terms of Peter, what did he learn from it? Or is it the fact that he repented? That's what
In terms of Peter learning from it, I think for him, it would have been that he went straight to Jesus and then Jesus reinstated him as a disciple. Because the Bible doesn't necessarily say what's been going on in Peter's head, right? But his betrayal of Jesus was telling him, hey, I'm never going to betray you. I'm never going to turn my back on you. He's basically saying, I'm going to be the best disciple there is. Because he said, even if everyone else betrays you, I'm not going to do that because I'm the best disciple. He doesn't say that, but that's what it implies, right? And so the fact that he does betray Jesus, and he said that, I could venture a guess that in his mind there's all this turmoil about, oh man, am I even worthy? Can I even be a disciple? And so when Jesus then tells him, hey, do you love me? And then he says, feed my sheep, take care of my lambs. Jesus is reinstating him and showing him that actually, I've always called you, that your position is not based on your performance. And just because you've made a mistake doesn't disqualify you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You might also learn that he relied a lot on so strict.
Yeah.
No, they must not.
God had to bring him to that place where he will start trusting in God's strength to do the ministry.
Yes, because then when Jesus said, "You're gonna deny me," Peter, it's like, "No, I'll never deny." So,
I can do it now.
Yeah.
What did Joseph though?
For Joseph, again, the Bible doesn't really go into much about his thoughts at the time. But at the very end of Genesis, Joseph, his brothers, I don't know if you read it, but his brothers come to Egypt because they need food, and then they discover, and then the whole family comes to Egypt. And Joseph says that, to his brothers, you guys intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to do the saving of many lives, which is being done. And so I think for Joseph, it was like, it would have been really hard going through all those years where initially God's given him that vision, that dream that, hey, your family's going to bow down to you. And then you go through all these years of being a prisoner, a slave, and it's like, what the heck, what is... But then at the end, when he sees the fulfillment of everything and he becomes the second in charge of all of Egypt, and he understands that there's like the famine happening, then he understands like, oh, that's why I went through all these things, to be put into this position now. Because without Joseph and his interpretation of the dream, Egypt would never like saved all that food, right? But it was because of God working through Joseph that he not only saved all the Egyptians, but other people around as well, who all came to Egypt to buy food.